Kyle here from All Media Reviews, here to do a little bit of an update and a review of the Steve Martin documentary in two pieces. Steve, a couple of things though just before I get to that. So, the stuff I can update on some stuff is happening for me with this documentary of sorts. More of a slideshow which will hopefully turn into some documentaries later for modern progressive art rock. So it's more a matter of just my having the time and being disciplined to like mess around with some software or just the stuff with Windows, how to do it. But I've done the research on a lot of the chronological stuff, and I don't know, it might only be one slideshow actually, because it's so quick. Anyway, that's coming up. I am going to do albums of the year, first quarter kind of thing. And I've got a list. It's over 10 albums, but it's not. Again, we're only whatever we are 3 months into the year, so it's kind of a vague list, of course. But I'm not going to do it today. I'll probably do it Monday or Tuesday, depending on timing, because today is Friday. In Vain's album Solemn got pushed back. I didn't even realize till last night, till April 19th. So today, the only thing that came out new was the Warnings song Automatic Sun, which is different, I'm liking, but it's more of a grindier, grittier piece. And then Childish Japes Silhouettes, I think it's called, Vignettes rather. It's going to be the second part of that, A Matter of Life and Death Part 2, I believe. So that came out today. Childish Japes featuring Joanna Teeters. It's kind of have like a reggae feel to it, but I know the details about the record. I'll have to pass along when I know more about that. A couple of things. Mew did a show a few days ago with an orchestra in London, and they played a new song called Gliding, and it may suggest they have... It was really good, really kind of epic nature with the orchestra and everything, so maybe there's a new Mew record in the works, maybe even this year. I mentioned the comics, like the Pepe Deluxe Comic Sonics. That album's coming out. Got confirmed June 21st. But and then Miracles of Modern Science. I didn't mention Miracles of Modern Science, a band that for a short window of time, I was kind of really getting into, and some of my friends got into, including my friend Christian. They put out their first song called "Birthday Cake" a few days ago, and their presence and activity on social media, at least from what I can tell, is still limited. But the fact they had a Kickstarter campaign a few years ago for a tribute to the Mountain Goats or something, but I don't know. I really like Birthday Cake. It's good. I mean, if this means we're gonna get, it was on their Bandcamp. They did a video on YouTube for it also. So I would love to see Miracles of Modern Science do more music, put out a record, tour maybe, because it was like a 2-3 year period. I saw them a couple times. They were getting some activity. They did a cover of Get Lucky from Daft Punk, I remember, which was really good. So anyway, so that's about it. I mean, there's stuff coming up for Record Store Day and other stuff that's coming up in a few weeks. Next week is Ben Sinister. So, but why don't I get on to the Steve Martin documentary, Steve, that my wife and I watch. It's on Apple TV, and so we watch it sort of in segments because we tend to do it. My wife, unfortunately, is under the weather for the past week, even though she doesn't have COVID again, we believe. It's just a upper respiratory cold, really. But it's sort of not her energy level varies. We really watched this in 6 or 7 segments over the last. It wasn't yesterday. It was over the weekend and then middle of this week. So it's two. Now I was watching this intermittently between that and the PGA Tour Full Swing documentary series on Netflix. But so I didn't just watch it. I spent a few days since I finished watching this. But it's a documentary. Steve Martin, a documentary in 2 pieces, and it's basically 2 90-minute, about 90 minutes, about an hour and a half sections, episodes, you want to call it or whatever. The first half especially is more, It does follow some of these traditional style documentaries of, like, we saw them, like the Mary Tyler Moore one, and some other ones where they show, or like, I'm trying to think of another example. The Carlos Santana one might be a better comparison, where they show footage from the past and then they're showing him, or he's narrating it, parts of it, and talking about different experiences. But the first half of it is, for the most part, his talking about his upbringing. Of course, I think they said that he was born in Texas, but then ended up moving. His parents moved because his dad wanted to get involved in, I think it might have been in theater or in Hollywood at the point. I think it was movies, maybe. In Hollywood, so they moved to Southern California. It was LA, I think, or I forget. It was Southern California. I mean, he worked at Disneyland. Talks about that in like the trailer for a long time, but it mostly focuses on his stand-up career, which really started. It was technically, I guess, maybe about 61, 62, 63. He did an album, like a comedy album, but his stand-up career in that point through about the mid 70s. Maybe it was actually it went past that, but the first episode really goes through about the mid 70s. And that part, I think, was the most informative in that it was showing showing his routine, how sort of different, out there, experimental, kind of unapologetic about anything he would do or say. I mean, he wasn't really offending people exactly, but he didn't have the kind of filter that I'm guessing the previous sort of generation of comedians and people that did stand-up did. He kind of reinvented stand-up in some ways. I mean, he wasn't the only one. There were some others around that, Bob Newhart, or, you could say it's people like Cosby and Richard Pryor, of course, and George Carlin, which were doing stand-up around the same time. I mean, I don't know if he came about a little bit after some of them, but he was really like it would go back and forth. He was talking about how he'd go from these little teeny clubs to, at some point, he would go to like a big theater. And he had his banjo, of course, and he was a magician. He wanted to do magic and all this stuff that I knew about the banjo playing. He had albums playing banjo kind of thing, but he used it in his act. He used the magic part with the balloons and stuff with the arrow through the head. I mean, he had a lot of gags or tropes or sort of signature kind of attempts, and I think maybe not all of them worked for every audience. But eventually it sort of caught on. He got to be, it caught on enough, and it got to be successful enough where it didn't matter if there were people that didn't find him funny or certain jokes funny. There were enough that would, and enough that he was batting at a higher percentage, basically. And he just kind of became like this kind of cult, almost like a rock star. And he had these albums that were outselling music, like rock star albums. They were on the Billboard charts and all this stuff. And they talked about how, like, especially like right after, I don't know if you'd say it was like after like Vietnam happened, or really early 70s, I think he started to really connect with college kids. And that's really where his audience, well, they were younger than him. He was born in 45, so he was into his mid-20s at that point. But so, I mean, yeah, some of the stuff, some of his lines were just hilarious. It's like, I like it over here. I like it over here. I like it over. He's like moving. It's like, I think I like it over here. I'm really glad to be in this space. And they showed him showing up, of course, on Carson, and his progression was sort of, and I guess he was like he was like depressed, or he was not the happiest person when he was younger. Kind of probably struggling through a lot of this. But as he found success, he got happier, but his whole point was that a lot of people by the end of their lives are tired and unhappy, or I don't know if that's the best word to put it. Whereas he found he was as happy as he got older, depending on, even though he stopped doing stand-up, it was like 1980, they were saying. For a while, I mean, he's doing it in a show with Martin Short now, touring Steve Martin. But, I mean, so you think about a Steve Martin documentary, you think they would talk a lot about his movies. They did talk about Saturday Night Live. They showed some footage. Although, like, there was an interview on CBS this morning a few weeks ago talking about this documentary with the filmmaker. The filmmaker is this guy named, they had it on here. I thought the guy was he the producer or the director? He was someone who was a fan of Steve's, a younger guy. But of course, I'm all cast and crew. I should click on that link here. Morgan Neville, who he was known for 20 Feet from Stardom. That's right, and then the Mr. Rogers documentary. Fred Rogers, Won't You Be My Neighbor, which I never saw. 20 Feet from Stardom. My wife did, but I did see Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Mr. Rogers documentary, which was, yeah. I mean, it was. I could see why he was trying to make him more human, and it was. It was trying not to be so predictable about your documentary style. But in effect, the first part and the second part were, in effect, a chronological, telling in some ways. But again, you had him doing narrating. So the second half is, you think it would have been more about, I mean, they talked about Saturday Night Live a little bit. They didn't really interview too many people from Saturday Night Live. But it was really more about some of his movie career and then some of his sort of like personal life, his relationship with his parents. I mean, they talked about it in the first one, but his life now, his like, he was married to one woman, and he was married to the wife now who's like whatever she is. She's not that much older than me. She's like 52 or something like that. And they have a daughter, Steve Martin, who during the documentary, he was in his mid-70s, now he's like 78, saying that, when his daughter's like 12, his daughter was born in like 2010 or 2012 rather, when she's going to be in her professional life, he probably won't be around for a lot of that. Maybe he'll be able to be around at the point she graduates college, but, I mean, Steve Martin, that's the thing about him. Of course, he had gray hair at a very young age. Like they show that in the history where his hair starts turning gray when he's like in his early 30s. But he like, I'd say he looks pretty good for his age. He doesn't look. He's 78 or 76 in this. He looks like he could be in his. I don't know. He doesn't look as old, but yeah. I mean, obviously. You have some people that live well into their 90s, but we'll see. But he had a daughter. He didn't have any kids before that. When he was in his whatever he was early 60s when his daughter was born, or mid 60s, and his wife was that much younger than him. But yeah, I mean they talk a lot about Martin Short and his relationship with Martin Short. They did talk about Three Amigos. They didn't do much on Chevy Chase, of course, because whatever. They're not. Martin Short and him are in Only Murders in the Building right now, of course, and they did obviously Three Amigos, but they've been doing this tour the last 3-4 years. I don't know how long it's been. This is the first time he's done. It's not exactly stand up like he used to do it, but a stand up of some kind, a stage act with Martin Short. But yeah, I mean it's good to see what Martin Short's relationship with him. I mean he's just like friends with him. He hangs out with him. And they interviewed people like Eric Idle and Jerry Seinfeld. They have Jerry Seinfeld talking. Almost interviewing Steve Martin at one point, but on Letterman, they didn't actually interview Letterman. They showed clips of Letterman. They didn't, certain people were briefly in there. I'm guessing there's a lot of footage that, obviously that was shot that wasn't included or whatever because they have to cut stuff. Lauren Michaels, Selena Gomez was just shown. She wasn't interviewed. Tina Fey he did interview her a little bit, but I don't know. I mean, Steve Martin's a highly likable entertainer, versatile. I mean. The thing I think of him most for, of course, since his stand-up stuff was pretty much done, I think of him first and foremost for the movies, and I've seen a lot of his movies, but there's a lot of movies I have not seen. And then SNL, at one point I used to thought he was a regular, but he was just a guest. They didn't really talk about King Tut, though, which is weird. That was, of course, a song that charted on Billboard. It may have been number 1, actually. It was on one of his albums. But he did that on SNL. He performed it, but... The Wild and Crazy Guys sketch, they talked about a little bit, of course. But, yeah, I mean, they did show some stuff from The Jerk, which is a favorite of mine. I've always really enjoyed that movie. And his second movie, which kind of bombed, he was expecting to do better. I forget the name of it. But I mean, some of the movies on Roxanne a little bit. They didn't do a lot on planes, trains, and automobiles. Just a hair. I've never seen L.A. Story. They showed a clip or two from it. It's a movie I've always wanted to see. And they didn't talk a lot about some of the stuff he's done the last 20 years, like Shop Girl, or I forgot he was in Big Year. Big Year was a movie that had all these good people. Jack Black, Jim Parsons, I was reminded, was in that. But it ultimately wasn't, kind of light. It didn't actually go far enough. They mentioned the Pink Panther movies, which I didn't even see. I saw part of one of them, and I know it just, as much as you could sort of say, oh, Steve Martin could be Inspector Clouseau, French accent, you know. But I mean, I don't think they really. I'm sure that Steve Martin probably had some say on what was going to be talked about and what wasn't. And I don't think the Pink Panther stuff was really a career highlight for him. He really, like, you know. But no, I mean, it was good if you're a Steve Martin fan. Oh yeah, they talked about Parenthood, of course. But it wasn't like, you know, it's like, well, they have to do a documentary series about any, like, sort of lifelong career achieving actor or entertainer in Hollywood. I think the fact it shows a lot more about his career before Hollywood, I guess, is the biggest takeaway I got from it. But, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, we cherish him while we run. We have certain comedians that aren't with us, like Robin Williams or these comedians that aren't around anymore. Just actors in Hollywood. It's good that they didn't make this after he was gone, in that sense. Because it's sad when you have these documentaries that are made, and then, you know, I don't know. Some people think that's sort of a curse or a death of your career or whatever, because, you know, it's time to make a career retrospective because your career's done. And I thought that he said that, yeah, a couple of years ago, he said that the Only Murders in the Buildings role he's doing now, which I think he's an executive producer and all this stuff, is going to be his last role in Hollywood. Now, who knows? But, you know, you had the people like Gene Hackman who've kind of just, he's done. And you had, Sean Connery retired, and then eventually he just passed away a couple of years ago. The thing that is sad about some of these people, like people from generations before, people are like the Generation Z, that generation may not be as conscious about Steve Martin. Having Only Murders in the Building be on and be sort of popular, and having people like Selena Gomez, has brought maybe a new generation onto Steve Martin's career. You know, he was a very sort of, you know, unique, iconic in some ways comedian of his generation, but I'd say before Only Murders, he was sort of just on the periphery. His last sort of in vogue role probably was the Pink Panther stuff, and even going, you know, I mean, he was doing more dramatic roles. I think that will help him, you know, and that's the value in doing a sort of a biography, a documentary, like Mary Tyler Moore, of course. There's a whole generation that doesn't even know how big Mary Tyler Moore was, and, you know, and I was kind of toward the tail end because I'm of the age when Mary Tyler Moore's show was already over by the time I knew what it was. But yeah, I mean, it's worth seeing, I guess, in that sense. You know, Steve Martin is less. He has less hang-ups compared to some people in Hollywood, people that have been sort of quote-unquote canceled or whatever. And, you know, his story is, there's more to tell about his story than just the fact he was in, you know, these movies, X, A, B, C, D, and E, or he was a regular in Saturday Night Live. I know they did the whole thing where he was SNL. They did, like, you know, the 14 Club or the 15 Club or whatever. Yeah, I mean, The Jerk, he's known for Roxanne, the LA Story, The Jerk, Pink Panther. I mean, he's not just that. I actually think Planes, Trains, and Automobiles should be a movie. It is often shown during Thanksgiving. That will kind of potentially, you know, supplant his sort of legacy in Hollywood for decades. Hopefully people will always watch that movie during Thanksgiving. I mean, R.I.P. John Candy and everything. Yeah, by the way, R.I.P. This is occurring. I'm talking about this, that, you know, a few days after we lost Joe Flaherty, you know, R.I.P. from SCTV and Freaks and Geeks. It kind of made me think. I was like, oh, did Steve Martin ever work with Joe Flaherty? He might have, but Martin Short, of course, did, because Martin Short wrote something about Joe Flaherty. So anyway, that's my my take on the Steve Martin documentary. But if you've seen it, what did you think? What's your favorite Steve Martin movie? I mean, I'd probably go with Three Amigos still, but I mean, when I do my movies of the year lists, hopefully in the next 6 months, I'll be including some. But a movie like L.A. Story, maybe I'll get around to watching that. I have not seen. I've always meant to see that movie, but thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. One other part I forgot. This seems to happen to me always. I don't like keep notes. I like keep notes whenever I watch something. One other cool thing you did learn in the second half of the Steve Martin documentary series is he's doing this. He's having his movies, like scenes from certain movies, done into some sort of like cartoon. He's having it published. He's going to have it like in a book, published like an animated version of different scenes of his. It's like he's going through his. He's working with this artist, and it's neat. I mean, that would be a new medium. I don't know if it's going to become something more well done that take your favorite actors or take Tom Hanks or something and you can get his top 30 movies or 30 of his favorite movies, taking scenes and sort of drawing them in an animated sort of comic strip. It's like a comic strip. And he's like having meetings like with Martin Short about this and stuff. It was interesting to see that. I don't know if those are published yet. I don't know like how pricey they are, but it'd be neat to see. It'd be neat to see more actors that did that. It's like I get it. I mean, there are like movies in like graphic novel versions of movies I know, but this is very particular, very curated specifically for Steve Martin's career, and it's not the whole movie. Obviously, it's just certain scenes, sort of relived into comic strip form, and I think it's cool. I don't know. I mean, AI. You have AI doing something like that, but. One other note I also wanted to add, I did buy a ticket for the Beat tour, the King Crimson, Adrian Belew-led band that was announced a few weeks ago with Steve Vai and Tony Levin and Danny Carey. They're playing songs from that early 80s King Crimson, The Discipline, Beat, and Three of a Perfect Pair era. He was on with, the four of them were on with Rick Beato a few days ago on YouTube for like an hour and change talking about it, but they're coming to the day before Election Day on, I think it's November 4th. They're coming to Minneapolis at the State Theater, so I'm going to get going. I already bought a ticket. It still was like $80 and with the fees and everything like that. I bought the second cheapest ticket. But I'm not that I'm huge, as I've talked about on my Albums of the Year series, and when talking about my interest in 80s King Crimson isn't huge. I like certain songs more than others, but I'm thinking this could be well worth seeing because it'll be kind of a unique tour. It'll be a rare tour. And, I mean, I'm not a Tool fan much. Steve Vai can take or leave, really. But to hear Steve Vai trying to interpret... I mean, obviously I'd rather have Robert Fripp if he was there and Bill Bruford. But to have those guys, to see them to play a lot of that stuff should be unique. Beyond, the track that I love, Three of a Perfect Pair. So... Anyway, those are the two other things that just crossed my mind after I finished up here, but I just wanted to include them. But again, thank you for watching. Have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll see you next time.